What do you believe to be reality? Is the complex tapestry of sensations, thoughts, and experiences that make up yourself a faithful representation of the world outside? Or is there an invisible barrier, a subtle veil, that fundamentally distorts and shapes your perception? Ask yourself, doesn't the act of observing something alter the very nature of what is being observed? This is not a rhetorical question from a philosopher seeking academic theses. It is a visceral question, touching the essence of our interaction with the universe. Imagine for a moment that every time you focus your attention on an object, a person, or even a thought, you are inadvertently triggering a series of transformations that redefine the very phenomenon you are trying to understand. This is the premise we will explore, the subtle and omnipresent observer's trap, and how, by understanding it, we can begin to recalibrate the very definition of reality. We live in an unprecedented information age, where data constantly bombards our senses. We are bombarded with news, scientific discoveries, and narratives that shape our understanding of the world. Yet paradoxically, this abundance of information can obscure deeper truths about how we interact with knowledge. We tend to assume that our ability to observe and analyze is objective, a faithful mirror of truth. We believe that science, with its rigorous methods, provides us with direct access to reality as it is. But what if the very structure of our perception, the way our brain processes information, and even the act of directing our consciousness towards something, introduces an intrinsic bias, an inherent distortion that prevents us from seeing things in their purest form? The observer trap suggests precisely this, that we are not mere passive spectators of the universe, but active participants, whose actions of observing and interacting leave an indelible mark on the very reality we attempt to decipher. This topic, though it may sound esoteric at first glance, has profound ramifications that extend from the realms of quantum physics to the nuances of human psychology and artificial intelligence. Consider the difficulty of measuring the exact state of subatomic particles without disrupting their behavior. Or consider how our expectations about an outcome can influence the outcome itself, a phenomenon known as a self-fulfilling prophecy. The way we frame a question can determine the answer we receive, both from an individual and from a system. The observer trap is not a problem isolated to a specific discipline. It is a unifying principle that underlies many of the most intriguing questions about knowledge, consciousness, and the very nature of existence. It is the realization that by attempting to dissect reality, we risk altering it in ways we cannot even imagine. Our journey will focus on peeling back the layers of this trap, beginning with its most surprising manifestations and progressing to a deeper understanding of its implications. We will not seek to refute objectivity or delve into absolute relativism, but rather to propose a new lens through which we can examine our interaction with the world. By understanding the observer's trap, we are not merely unraveling a scientific or philosophical mystery. We are opening the door to a recalibration of our own perception, an invitation to recognize the limits of our vision, and, in doing so, expand our horizons of understanding. This is an invitation to question the foundations of what we consider real, and to embrace the idea that reality, far from being a fixed and immutable stage, is a dynamic process, co-created by the interaction between the observer and the observed. Prepare to see your own experience of the world change. To advance our understanding of the observer's trap, it is crucial to delve into the historical and philosophical origins that paved the way for this perception. The idea that an individual's consciousness interacts intrinsically with external reality is not a recent concept. It dates back to ancient thinkers who already debated the nature of perception and the possibility of objective knowledge. In ancient Greece, for example, the debate between Heraclitus and Parmenides already touched on questions of permanence versus change, and how our observation of a world in constant flux could be fundamentally limited. Heraclitus, with his famous statement that no one can step twice into the same river, emphasized the dynamic and changing nature of everything, including the observer's own experience. Parmenides, on the other hand, argued for the immutability of being, suggesting that the change we perceive is actually an illusion of the senses. These early discussions already planted the seed of doubt about the neutrality of the act of observation. Later, British empiricism, with figures such as John Locke and David Hume, deepened this investigation, focusing on the origin of ideas and the influence of sensory experience. Locke postulated that the human mind is a blank slate at birth, and all our knowledge derives from experience. However, he also recognized that experience is mediated by our senses and the way our minds process this information. Hume went even further, questioning the very notion of causality and the existence of a substantial and constant self, suggesting that what we call self is actually a bundle of constantly changing perceptions. This perspective, which devalues objective certainty and emphasizes the subjectivity of experience, is a direct precursor to our discussion of the observer's trap, as it suggests that the line between the observer and the observed is, at best, blurred. German idealism with Immanuel Kant brought about a revolution by arguing that the mind is not a mere passive receiver of sensory impressions, but rather an active agent that structures and organizes experience. Kant proposed that we have innate structures, such as space, time, and causality, that shape how we perceive the world. This means that we do not perceive things as they are in themselves, the noumenon, but rather as they appear to us, filtered through our own cognitive faculties, the phenomenon. This distinction is fundamental. It does not deny the existence of an external reality, but asserts that our access to it is inevitably mediated by our perceptual and cognitive apparatuses. It is like wearing prescription glasses. They correct your vision, but the image you see is still an image through the lenses, not pure, unobstructed vision. The lens in this case is our own mind and how it operates. The Kantian notion that the reality we know is internally constructed is a pillar for understanding how the act of observing can, in fact, be imbued with our own structures of apprehension. This historical journey brings us to a crucial point. The observer trap is not a quirk of modern physics, but rather an echo of millennia-old philosophical debates about the nature of reality and knowledge. The way philosophy has explored the subjectivity of experience, the structure of perception, and the limits of human knowledge has paved the way for more recent disciplines, such as quantum physics, to find a conceptual framework to explore this interaction between observer and observed. Understanding these historical roots is essential to appreciating the depth of the question and to demystifying the idea that modern science invented this problem. On the contrary, it has brought it to the experimental stage, offering new evidence and new ways to interrogate a puzzle that has fascinated humanity for centuries. The realization that our experience of the world is, in part, a construction of our own cognitive apparatus, shaped by predispositions and internal structures, is the first step toward recognizing that the act of observation is not a simple capture of data, but an active engagement that inevitably leaves its mark. Quantum mechanics offers an extraordinary laboratory for concretely examining the observer trap at the most fundamental level of reality. The behavior of subatomic particles seems to defy our classical intuition based on the macroscopic world. An electron, for example, can exist in multiple superposition states simultaneously. It's as if it were in multiple places or possessed multiple properties simultaneously. However, the moment we attempt to measure or observe the electron to determine its exact state, this superposition collapses, and the particle chooses a single state. The very act of observation forces reality to manifest itself in a specific way, eliminating the other possibilities that existed prior to the measurement. This phenomenon, known as wave function collapse, is one of the most debated and enigmatic aspects of quantum physics. It's not a flaw in our measuring instruments, but an intrinsic property of nature at its most intimate scale. Every attempt to obtain information about a quantum particle alters the system being studied. If you want to know the exact position of an electron, you disturb its linear momentum and vice versa, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Thus, the observer in quantum physics need not be a conscious human being. It can be any interaction that extracts information from the system, be it a detector, another particle, or even the environment. The crucial point is that the interaction that seeks clarity about one aspect of reality inevitably obscures or modifies another aspect. Imagine trying to photograph a ghost. When you activate the flash, you can for a moment see its shape, but the very light emitted by the camera, the energy you injected into the system, may be what makes the image vanish. This leads us to a deeper understanding of what it means to observe. In classical physics, we assume we can observe an object without significantly affecting it, like an astronomer observing a distant star. In the quantum world, this radical separation between observer and observed dissolves. Subatomic reality is not a predetermined script that we only reveal by watching. Instead, it appears to be a spectrum of potentialities that are realized in part by our own interaction. Consider, for example, the double-slit experiment. When electrons are fired through two slits without us knowing which slit they pass through, they behave like waves, creating a characteristic interference pattern. However, if we place detectors at the slits to observe which slit each electron passes through, the interference pattern disappears, and the electrons begin to behave like discrete particles. The act of knowing, or trying to detect the electron's individual trajectory, forces it to adopt a different behavior. The reality we measure is therefore influenced by the question we ask and the method we employ to obtain the answer. Nature, in its quantum essence, appears to be responsive and moldable to the very investigation we impose upon it. The observer trap manifests itself in surprisingly concrete ways in our daily lives, shaping not only our perception of external reality, but also our very understanding of ourselves and our social interactions. A vivid example of this can be found in social psychology, especially in the phenomenon known as the bystander effect. Imagine witnessing an emergency situation in public. The human tendency under certain circumstances is to hesitate to intervene, or even not to intervene at all. The apparent justification may be a perceived lack of urgency or a sense of unpreparedness. However, the root of this behavior often lies in the very dynamics of shared observation. Each individual in the crowd is watching the others, looking for signs of how to react. If no one else seems alarmed or willing to act, the tendency is to interpret this collective inaction as validation that the situation is not as dire as it might seem. Thus, mutual observation, far from promoting faster and more decisive action, can lead to paralysis. The individual's reality, in this scenario, is not only that of the event itself, but also that of their perception of others' perceptions. They are, in effect, observing others' observation, and this additional layer of information or misinformation reshapes their behavioral response. Their decision to act or not to act is, therefore, intrinsically linked to how the act of observing themselves in a social context influences their actions. The objective truth of the emergency may be clear to an isolated observer, but in a crowd context, the reality of the situation becomes a social construction, mediated by the lack of directed observation and the search for implicit social validation. The act of not intervening, paradoxically, is a response shaped by the observation of others and the search for a consensual interpretation of the event. Furthermore, this dynamic extends to the realm of economics and consumer behavior. The speculative bubble is a classic example. In financial markets, the value of an asset can soar not necessarily due to solid intrinsic fundamentals, but rather due to the collective belief that it will appreciate. Investors observe the buying behavior of other investors, and this observation feeds back into this belief, further driving prices up. The reality of a stock's value in this context is less about its intrinsic value and more about the shared perception of its future potential. Observing the buying frenzy of others, the euphoria of those who bought early, leads others to enter the market, not through detailed analysis, but through a kind of observational contagion. The investment decision becomes less an objective assessment of risk and return, and more a response to the narrative under construction, fueled by the observation of collective behavior. The investor is effectively acting on the basis of the reality that others are helping to create through their own buying and selling actions, which are in turn observed by more people. This recalibration of reality through observation is not limited to external or economic events. It even permeates the way we construct our personal narratives and our own identities. In an increasingly digital world, online self-presentation has become a stage where the observer's trap operates with full force. People tend to display idealized versions of their lives on social media, presenting moments of success, happiness, and fulfillment, while omitting difficulties and failures. Curating personal content is not only an act of sharing, but also an act of self-observation and subsequently of modified presentation. By posting a photo, the individual is, in a sense, observing themselves and evaluating how they want to be perceived. They select what will be seen, projecting an image that, ideally, will be positively received by their observers. Consequently, the reality that emerges from this digital interaction is both a collective and individual construction. Observing the seemingly perfect lives of others online, we often feel inadequate. comparing our own raw reality with the edited version of someone else's life. This comparison is in itself an example of the observer trap. We are reacting to a representation, an artifact of observation and presentation, and allowing it to define our own perception of success or happiness. The very search for validation through likes and comments reinforces this cycle. The number of interactions becomes a metric of reality or value, influencing future posting behavior. Observing the response to their posts, a person recalibrates what they consider appropriate to share, shaping their own life narrative in response to external observation and their own performative self-observation. This complex dynamic demonstrates how the observer trap is not just a theoretical concept, but a powerful driver in shaping our daily experiences and our understanding of the world. As we weave together the threads of our exploration, we realize that the fabric of reality is intrinsically complex, involving not only what is out there, but also the unique way our own perspective interacts with the universe. The many layers we uncover suggest that the line between what is perceived and the perceiver is more fluid than we often assume. It's as if we are navigating an ocean where each wave we create as we move subtly alters the landscape we seek to navigate. The investigations we have uncovered, from the foundations of physics to the subtleties of human interaction, point to a recurring pattern. Our search for understanding, for objective clarity, often leads us to clash with the very nature of observation. The act of investigating, of questioning, of directing our focus is not a neutral process. It is in itself a force that participates in shaping what we seek to understand. Reflecting on this journey thus far, it's as if we've unraveled an intricate mirror mechanism, where each reflection not only returns an image but also distorts it in unexpected ways. Reality, far from being a solid and immutable cornerstone, reveals itself more like a river in constant motion, whose current is influenced, in part, by the very oars we use to propel our canoe. The discoveries and insights we've shared show us that the challenge lies not in eradicating this influence, for it is fundamental to the very existence of conscious experience, but in recognizing it. This initial acceptance is what allows us to advance to a more refined level of interaction with the world, paving the way for a perspective where the limits of our vision can, paradoxically, expand our horizons. As we contemplate the bigger picture shaped by our discussions, the path to a new understanding becomes clear. Understanding the trap is not an end in itself, but a gateway. It invites us to transcend the simple dichotomy between what is true and what is false, or between the objective and the subjective, to embrace a more integrated view of existence. It is the gateway to recognizing that the reality we experience is an ongoing dialogue, a symphony where each instrument, including our own, contributes to the final melody. This journey has prepared us for the moment when we can finally consider the deeper implications and new directions this recalibration can offer us. In light of these insights, the path forward becomes clearer, paving the way for the conclusion of this exploration. The nuances uncovered along the way converge toward a culmination, where the complexity of the observer-observed interaction is resolved not into a definitive answer, but into a new way of interrogating the act of knowing itself. It is an invitation to consider that by understanding the nature of our influence, we can, in fact, recalibrate not only our perception, but also the very way we shape and are shaped by the world. This transition to the conclusion seeks to solidify this perspective, signaling the arrival at a new level of understanding about the fundamental dynamics of our existence and our relationship with reality. The journey through the complex web of the observer's trap has brought us to a point of convergence, where the boundaries between what is perceived and the act of perceiving dissolve in a cosmic dance of interaction and mutual influence. It is no longer about unraveling a stagnant mystery, but about embracing a fundamental truth. The reality we experience is a continuous dialogue, an incessant flow where our very presence, our focused attention is not a mere spectator, but an active co-creator. The echoes of quantum physics, where measurement shapes the measurable, resonate in human interactions, in the way our expectations become self-fulfilling prophecies, and how collective perception can redefine the value and urgency of an event. Reality, therefore, is not a fixed stage where actors play their roles. It is a stage that dynamically reconfigures itself as actors move, interact, and crucially, observe each other and themselves. Understanding this trap is not an invitation to radical skepticism, but rather an awakening to the profound interconnectedness of all things. It means recognizing that pure objectivity, in the sense of knowledge completely detached from the observer, can be an unattainable ideal, a horizon that shifts as we approach it. Rather than lamenting this limitation, we can embrace it as a source of richness and depth. Our ability to influence reality through observation confers on us a responsibility and power we rarely acknowledge. The way we frame questions, the attention we pay to certain aspects of the world, the narratives we construct around our experiences, all contribute to the tapestry of the reality we inhabit. The observer's trap teaches us that by shifting our perspective, by refining our intention, we can, in fact, recalibrate the very nature of the world around us. The true practice begins now. It lies in cultivating a heightened awareness of this intrinsic interplay. It begins by questioning the assumptions we make about the neutrality of our perception and recognizing that our inquiry itself is an act of participation. In doing so, we do not lose the ability to know the world. Rather, we gain a new dimension of understanding, a deeper appreciation for the complexity and beauty of the universe. Reality expands not when we eliminate the observer, but when the observer becomes more aware of their role in the dance of existence. This recalibration is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of refinement, learning, and adaptation, opening us to the possibility of a richer, more meaningful experience and, ultimately, one more aligned with the profound interdependence that unites us with all that is. By embracing this dynamic, we dismantle the barriers that have limited us, and reality itself reveals itself, not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a constant invitation to participation and co-creation.